We are still reviewing Sujud Sahw, prostration of forgetfulness. We didn't read last week though. But we did read the whole chapter. We read the whole chapter, this whole digression here, for the prostration of forgetfulness. But we went through it swiftly, so then we reviewed the next week, which was 2 weeks ago. So we're still in review. But since we skipped a week, maybe I should just back up and do a quick refresh. Not to mention that really this chapter of Sujudu Sahw is a strong one. So, let's recap and try to get to where we left off, insha'Allah ta'ala. So, Sujudu Sahw, the sujud, prostration of forgetfulness. It is sanctioned for patching deficiency in the prayer. Yani, you have a defect in your prayer. Some people do sujudu sahw for no reason. I've seen that from more than one person. They say, just in case I did something in my prayer, this is not valid. This will invalidate your prayer. You have to have warrant for sujudu sahw. Not just to do it just in case. So what warrants sujudu sahw in general is two things. Committing something prohibited in the prayer. That means adding something prohibited in the prayer. That means adding an extra integral in the prayer. Adding to the prayer an integral of action. Or another rakat. You stood up for a fifth rakat, for example. Or for abandoning something commanded to be done in the prayer. Like you are about to pray only 3 rakats for a 4-fold prayer. And then you caught yourself and stood up. Or you might have even left out something sunnah, but it is a component of the prayer. One of those emphatic sunan of the prayer. Because in this chapter of prostration of forgetfulness, to understand it properly, you have to understand that there's 2 types of sunnah for the prayer. Sunnah means non-obligatory act. The prayer has obligations and sunan, yani voluntary acts or voluntary parts. Obligatory parts and voluntary parts. But the voluntary parts are 2 categories, according to our translation. The components and the forms. Component is ba'd, and a form is a hay'ah. And you know, insha'Allah ta'ala, that the hay'ah actually has nothing to do with the chapter of Sujudu Sahw. Hay'ah is irrelevant to the chapter of Sujudu Sahw. So in the chapter of Sujudu Sahw, there's only 2 things we're concerned with. Obligatory parts of the prayer and those sunnahs that are called components. Inshallah, today we're going to list them. So, general rule. You do sujudu sahw for committing something prohibited in the prayer, or for abandoning something commanded to be done in the prayer. You see the examples we have here. Like an extra standing, etc. Or leaving out bowing, or leaving out standing. Or leaving out one of the components of prayer that's not here in this paragraph. The only thing in this paragraph is the obligatory parts of the prayer, as far as the examples. It says, generally for committing something prohibited in prayer, like adding, like an extra standing or extra bowing or extra prostration or extra sitting, out of place, and only forgetfully. When it comes to adding, it can only be forgetfully. Because if you add on purpose, an action integral is going to invalidate your prayer. That's why you cannot do sujudu sahw just in case. Doing a sujud at the end of the prayer just in case just amounts to doing what's right here. Adding an extra prostration. For someone to think that it's a good idea to do sujud before the salam just in case, he invalidates his prayer because he is adding on purpose, not forgetfully, a prostration, which is an integral of action. Had he had warrant for sujood sahw, though, then it would not invalidate his prayer. But don't forget the sujood sahw needs its own intention. So, that's sujood sahw and the general rule that governs it. Sujood sahw is 2 prostrations before the salam, you know that. Okay. And the rest of this that's here, I'm not going to read this again now. So let's go right to where we left off. The author says before that, is there any question? Brother Bashir, ahlan wa sahlan. So the author says, this prostration, the sujood of sahw, it patches the component that was abandoned forgetfully without difference in opinion. Without difference in opinion pertaining to it being abandoned forgetfully. That's what the scholars didn't differ about. What if you left out any of these components we're going to see? But a component is sunnah. What if you left it out on purpose? Does sujood sahw patch it? We say yes, but that's not a matter of consensus. But if you left out the component forgetfully, then this sujood patches that without difference in opinion. And it is forbidden to return to a component after reaching an integral. It is forbidden to return to a component after reaching an integral. This sentence right here can go down here. Now that's going to fit well. So, this prostration patches the component that was abandoned forgetfully without difference in opinion. Yes. Well, what are the components? We've gone through all this talk here. We keep saying the components. We didn't say, Yani, assuming we didn't already review this, what the components are. So here they are. Finally. Question, do you have to have tuma'nina in sujood sahw? Yes. Don't forget, the conditions and recommendations of the normal sujud are true for sujood sahw. Whatever makes a normal obligatory integral sujud valid, then you need that for sujood sahw to be valid. And whatever is sunnah for an integral sujud, like saying Subhana Rabbiyal A'la, is sunnah for sujood sahw. So what are the sunnah parts of the prayer that have a special name that we're translating as component? The ba'd. Squeeze it in there just to remind you. The ba'd. It's already in other parts of the book though. Yani, assuming you're studying this book and you've reached here understanding everything that's before it, there's not a need to repeat this, but it's okay. This prostration patches the ba'd, the component that was abandoned forgetfully without difference in opinion. But the one that was left out deliberately, there is a difference in opinion. If you can still do sujood sahw for that. What are these components? They are, so as far as the number is concerned, you see 7. So I'll tell you right now. and I think it's documented here. Most of the explanations of Abu Shuja, those that I have used to compile this document that I'm reading to you, they mention only 6 components for the prayer. They mention only 6 components for the prayer. So we have these first 6, and then there's something else. We'll see it. So what are these components? Without me reading every word here, just to keep it easy, the first one is the first tashahhud. So if you leave out the first tashahhud, forgetfully, or on purpose even, because that's the saying we go by, or even on purpose, then you do sujudu sahw before the salam. Yani, it's recommended, not obligatory, to do that sujud. Two, sitting for the first tashahhud. Sitting for that tashahhud, which is the first tashahhud. So if you don't sit for the first tashahhud, then you do sujudu sahw. And here, this might confuse you, like it confused me when I first learned it. Okay, the first tashahhud, we know you do it from the sitting position. Yes, all right. Question just to make sure there's no confusion. Can you do tashahhud from a standing position? No. Answer is no. Okay, so tashahhud is only from sitting position. Yes, that's it. Only from sitting position. Okay. So if a person does the tashahhud, that would mean he's sitting, right? Right. And if a person is sitting, that doesn't mean he's doing the tashahhud, though, right? Right. Okay. So first tashahhud is one thing, sitting for first tashahhud is another thing. So we're saying here, if you don't do the first tashahhud, then you make sujudu sahw, recommended to do so. Uh, would that mean necessarily that you didn't sit for the first tashahhud? No. It's possible a person sat for the first tashahhud without saying it. And if he doesn't say it, he should do sujudu sahw? Yes. Okay. Now the second one is sitting for the first tashahhud. If you don't do it, you do sujudu sahw. Yes, that's right. Okay. So if I did sit for my first tashahhud, does that mean I did actually say it? No, doesn't. Okay. But if I did not sit for the first tashahhud, then doesn't that mean that I definitely did not say it? Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's how that works. Yeah, that's how it works. That's it. That's it. Okay. Any question here about those first two?
You're right.
Yes.
You know, if somebody sometimes you can sit even if it's not tashahud for a while before you get up. But is there a duration that is considered you sat for tashahud, or that small sitting is considered like as if you sat but you didn't did the tashahud itself?
That small sitting is in a different position
Okay.
because that one is that one
In the first and second, and
it's definitely after the first rakat, and it's definitely after the third rakat of a 4 rakat prayer
okay,
as a sunnah.
yes,
And as for after the second rakat of a 3 or 4 rakat prayer, supposing a person stood up and didn't sit, but he did just sit briefly there, this is not the sitting that we're talking about.
yes. Thank you. Jazakallah khair.
I mean, what? Yeah. But just for the fact that he anyway cannot say tashahhud there in that brief sitting, then he would for sure make sujudu sahw here as a sunnah. Please. So those are the first two components. Component meaning that this sunnah is more emphatic than the forms, which now I'm not going to mention them. Maybe, Yani, if you need me to mention them, remind me before we finish. The third component is prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the first tashahhud. Okay, because you do tashahhud, and then the end of the tashahhud is the shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. Then is sunnah here. Is sunnah, not obligatory here. After the first tashahhud, sunnah to say the likes of Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Leaving this one out, this prayer for the Prophet out here at this position. Also, this prayer for the Prophet in this position, it is a component. Leaving it out in this position warrants sujudu sahw. Even deliberately. Okay. Now, the fourth component is prayer for the Prophet's family after the second tashahhud. Prayer for the Prophet's family after the second tashahhud. So that means you said your whole tashahhud until you got to Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. That's the prayer for the Prophet. That's the shahada at the end of the tashahhud. Then it's obligatory here at the end of the prayer to say the likes of Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And then it's sunnah here to say prayer for the Prophet's family. Wa ala ali Muhammad. So that prayer for the Prophet's family right there, that's a component also. That's the last rakat. And number 5 is the dua al-qunut. Skipping dua al-qunut is like skipping the first tashahhud. So leaving out the qunut supplication, and we're taking the saying even on purpose. That's in the Fajr prayer or the witr prayer in the last half of Ramadan. Warrants sujudu sahw. And number 6, standing for the qunut supplication. So now that's just like we talked about for tashahhud and sitting for tashahhud, which is if I am doing dua al-qunut, does it mean I'm standing? We talk about normal case, not a person who can't stand. If I'm doing dua al-qunut, does it mean I'm standing? Yes, it does. If you're praying properly, of course, is the implication here, the assumption. Yes, you would be standing if you're doing dua al-qunut. That means you came up from ruku' and then you started doing the dua before you go down to sujud. Okay, so that's number 5, the dua al-qunut. But number 6 is standing for the dua al-qunut. So if I were standing for the dua al-qunut, does it mean that I'm actually saying the dua? No. You might be standing there in that position without saying the dua that goes there. So then, if I abandon this sitting altogether, it means that I have, by extension, abandoned the kunut supplication? Yes, that's right. But if I did abandon the kunut supplication, does not mean that I abandoned standing there by extension. It doesn't mean that by extension I have abandoned standing there, right? That's right. Okay, I understand. So leaving out either one of those warrants sujudu sahu, although out of the two of these, leaving out one of them makes you leave out the other one by extension, which is the standing. If you leave out that one, you will be leaving out the dua by extension. The same thing for first tashahhud and sitting for the first tashahhud. Leaving out the first tashahhud, you will be leaving out the first tashahhud by extension, but not vice versa. So those are the 6 components that are documented in most of the explanations of Abu Shuja' that I used to contribute to this document. So, and I have it written here. The explanations for Abu Shuja' used for this synopsis only count 6 components, except Al-Basir, who adds prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his family in the Qunut. Prayer for the Prophet and for his family in the Qunut means after the Qunut. Okay. So it means it's Fajr prayer, for example. You come up from Ruku', before you go down to Sujud, you make your dua al-Qunut. اللهم اهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت, etc. And then you go down to and then you finish the dua, and according to this, after you finish dua al-Qunut, تباركت ربنا وتعاليت, then it's a component of the prayer for you then to pray for the Prophet. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. And according to this, it's a component of the prayer for you to pray for his family here in this position. Wa ala ali Muhammad. So according to that, if you skip either of those after Dua ul Qunut, then you should do Sujudu Sahw. Any question? Is the 4th component considered missed by starting to make dua? Prayer for the Prophet's family after the 2nd tashahhud? Uh, you mean, uh, couldn't he just go back? Yeah. Couldn't he just go back, assuming he isn't leaving it on purpose, since it's not an integral? Uh, so you're saying a person did tashahhud, and then after his tashahhud, 2nd tashahhud, which is the obligatory one. And then after his tashahhud, he said, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. He prayed for the Prophet, which is obligatory. And then, I'm just trying to verify your question here. Then instead of praying for the Prophet's family here, wa ala ali Muhammad, He started making dua such as uh, uh, Allahumma inni zalamtu nafsi zulman kathira ولا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت فاغفر لي مغفرة من عندك وارحمني إنك أنت الغفور الرحيم. So that's a dua. And I think you're asking me, so can he, for example, just go back and then pray for the Prophet's family? I don't know. Good question. If someone says half of the kunut and then says the prayer for the Prophet and his family, will it be valid? Uh, you mean, is sujudu sahu warranted still? Is sujudu sahu still warranted if he says half the dua al kunut and then he says prayer for the Prophet and his family? Is that your question? Yes. Dua, yani yes, meaning yes, dua al kunut. Yes, dua, yes, sujudu sahu is warranted if he says half of dua al kunut. That's why it's worded here, number 5. Even part of kunut supplication, we talk about leaving it, talking about abandoning. Even part of the kunut supplication. You said I didn't understand. What was your question? If someone says half of the dua al kunut. So the answer to your question is, first, let me just repose your question a little bit, because you asked if it's valid. And we're not talking about here validity. So the question itself is not really clear, but I think I know where you're getting at, and I'm just not going to give you a hard time to make you formulate your question again. So if someone says half of the dua of kunut, that means he skipped some of it. And then he prays for the Prophet and his family. So praying, if he didn't pray for the Prophet, if he did not make dua al-kunut, it would warrant sujudu sahu. If he did not pray for the Prophet, it would warrant sujudu sahu. If he did not pray for the Prophet's family, it would warrant sujudu sahu. That's 3 things. Out of these 3 things, you're confirming in your question that he did indeed pray for the Prophet's family, and he did indeed pray for the Prophet, and he stood for the kunut, yeah, and he said some of it, and he didn't finish it all. Does not finishing it warrant sujudu sahu? Yes. Because leaving out even part of the dua of kunut warrants sujudu sahu. Is it clear for you? Ameen wa fikum. It is forbidden to return to a component after reaching an integral, because it is forbidden to interrupt the obligation for something optional. So you saw me just slide the sentence all the way down here. This is a better spot for it, because this sentence is going to be understood better if the actual components are mentioned before this sentence. If this sentence is before all these components, then I have to assume you know what the components are. But by putting this sentence after the components, then I don't have to assume that you know what the components are. So it is forbidden to return to a component after reaching an integral. But this is the rule here. After reaching an integral, someone's question just a moment ago was so close to this question, but it wasn't exactly. This case of leaving out a component after reaching an integral, that's haram. So let's see, what are the components here, and is there an integral that comes after them? So first tashahhud, which would be done from a sitting position. So what's right after that? Standing for the next rakat. So if a person didn't do this first tashahhud and then he stood for the first rakat, which is itself an integral of the prayer, then it's not permissible for him to go back. Because it's not permissible for him to interrupt an obligatory part of his prayer to satisfy an optional one. So that's going to be true for number one and number two, meaning the position that comes afterwards of standing for that obligatory rakat, and therefore has the same rule. What about a prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the first tashahhud? So if a person skipped the prayer for the Prophet after the first tashahhud, and then what's he doing? Is he standing up for the next rakat? Prayer for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after the first tashahhud. Yeah, the prayer for the Prophet. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So if he, same thing also. Because what's he going to do after that? Stand up for the next rakat. So now he can't go back to it. Prayer for the Prophet's family in the second or after the second tashahhud. And how about the dua of kunut? So where is that position? That is after you come up from ruku' and before you go down to sujud. So if you were to skip it, that means you're going to go down to sujud. So it's not permissible to then interrupt that sujud to go back to dua al-kunut, which is optional part of the prayer. And then same thing for standing for dua al-kunut. It is forbidden to return to a component after reaching an integral because it is forbidden to interrupt the obligation for something optional. So who is Al-Basir? Is this a scholar's name? Yes. Al-Basir, he's called Abul Fadl Waliyuddin Al-Basir. He's a Shafi'i scholar. It has an advanced explanation of Abu Shuja. Very nice one. Ameen wa iyyakum. I have wanted to teach it like what I'm doing now, like just to teach it, but I don't think it's suitable for this kind of audience here. Needs prior knowledge the way it is. So I think it's not worth the effort before some other books. Wait, let's stop here. I'm a little drowsy. I wanted to finish this, but I'm not going to push myself further here. I'm afraid that I might slip or something. Do you have any question I can answer for you?